In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate, our dear viewers, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this exclusive episode on Imam Hussein TV 3, and today we are commemorating the martyrdom of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And before I get into details and talk about the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam, just briefly let me give you a brief introduction to his personality. And of course Imam Ali alayhi salam needs no introduction, but just for the sake of those who don't know much about his life. Imam Ali alayhi salam was born on 13th of Rajab in 600 AD inside Al-Kaaba, the cubic symbol, Allah's house, the holy of all holy places in the world, in Mecca, Hijaz. No other human being was ever born in such a holy place. And if we need to understand the importance, the relationship between the Prophet Muhammad and Imam Ali alayhi salam, of course, we need to go back to the earlier days of the Prophet's life. And during his childhood, the Prophet Muhammad lost his parents and he became an orphan. So the person who took him in custody and took care of him was the father of Imam Ali alayhi salam, the Prophet's uncle, Abu Talib. And when Imam Ali alayhi salam grew up and Abu Talib passed away, the Prophet Muhammad wanted to retain the favor to Imam Ali alayhi salam. So he took him in his custody and took care of him and raised him, polished his personality, and prepared him to play a major role in the dissemination of the Islamic creed. And of course, when we mention Imam Ali alayhi salam, we mention his bravery and we mention his courage. Here I would like to share with you a very clear example on that. Of course, during the time of the prophethood, when the revelation of Allah came down to the Prophet Muhammad and informed the Prophet Muhammad to publicly announce Islam and to invite people to this peaceful religion, many pagan Meccans who lived in the pre-Islamic era, the era of ignorance, and they were contemporaries to the time of the prophethood, those group of people posed a threat to the divine message of the Prophet Muhammad. So they decided to assassinate the Prophet Muhammad, to kill him, to end his message. Of course, Allah wanted to protect the Prophet Muhammad. So the revelation of Allah came down to the Prophet Muhammad and informed the Prophet with this heinous plot concluded against the Prophet Muhammad. So the Prophet Muhammad made his decision and he decided to leave Mecca because Mecca was no longer safer to him to be there. And he ordered his cousin, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, to stay in his house just to make those Meccans believe that he was the Prophet inside the house. And of course Imam Ali alayhi salam stayed in the Prophet's house while the Prophet succeeded in leaving his house safely. At the night, when those pagan Meccans attacked the house, they raided the house, they approached the bed, they removed the blanket from the bed, they found that Imam Ali alayhi salam was sleeping into the bed of the Prophet Muhammad. Of course, that deed was noble deed from Imam Ali alayhi salam, and it was recorded to Imam alayhi salam with a bane of light and honor. And of course, thus Allah glorified and praised that deed. And here I would like to share with you one verse from the Quran. Allah said in the Holy Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, in the verse number 207, "And among people is he who sells himself to seek the pleasures of Allah." So Imam Ali alayhi salam sold himself in order to protect the Prophet and put his life into risk while the Prophet succeeded in leaving his house safely. Of course, Imam Ali alayhi salam also was known for his generosity, kindness, charity to the poor and wretched of the people. And another deed from Imam Ali alayhi salam was also recorded in the Holy Quran. Of course, I'm going to recite the verse and then I'm going to get into details and explain to you what was the occasion for that verse. Allah said in Surah Al-Ma'idah, in the verse number 55, He said, "Verily your guardian is Allah, His messenger, and the believers, those who establish the prayers and gives zakat while bowing down." Well, who gives zakat while bowing down? Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, if you read the history of Islam, you would clearly see that no one, just Imam Ali alayhi salam, who gave zakat while bowing down. And once upon a time, when Imam Ali alayhi salam was praying into the Prophet's mosque, and a beggar came into the Prophet's mosque, and he begged people for charity, but no one gave him anything. So the beggar raised his hand to heaven and said, "Oh Allah, bear witness that I have came to your Prophet's mosque, and no one gave me anything." Imam Ali alayhi salam was praying, was in the form of ruku', bowing down to Allah in his prayer. And he had a ring into his little finger. So Imam Ali alayhi salam, while he was bowing down, he pointed his hand to the beggar, which came forward and took away that ring as a charity. And of course, that reveals to us the extent of altruism and devotedness of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Now, one of the most prominent features of a leader of a nation are self-denial and altruism. And these were the most distinguished features of Imam Ali's personality. He never exploited the position of succession when he was the successor of the Prophet Muhammad to achieve worldly pleasures. He was very careful with the wealth of his states. And of course, he was also known for his perfect piety and devotedness to Allah. He was known as Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Imam of pious, and the head of monotheists. And of course, the upcoming verse talks about the importance of Imam Ali alayhi salam after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. I'm going to recite the verse, then I'm going to get into details about that verse. Allah said in the Quran, in the Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 67, Allah said, O Messenger, announce that which has been revealed to you from your Lord. And if you do not, then you have not conveyed His message. And Allah will protect you from the people. Indeed, Allah does not guide the disbelieving people. This verse was revealed on a very historic and important event that took place between the city of Mecca and Medina, in a place known as Ghadir Khum. The Prophet Muhammad was performing his last pilgrimage, as it's known, the farewell pilgrimage. And his companions were accompanied with him, around 132,000 pilgrims. So he stood in front of them and said, the Prophet Muhammad said, that just as they accepted him as the Prophet Muhammad, so they were bound to accept Imam Ali alayhi salam, the commander of faithful, and he assigned Imam Ali alayhi salam as Amir al-Mu'mineen. And Amir al-Mu'mineen, it's the title of one that rules the Muslims as the highest religious authority and at the same time the supreme political leader. The Prophet Muhammad paid great attention to the matter of succession. He wanted to designate a person who should be able to lead the nation after his death and could save them from deviations, manipulations, and going astray. And it's quite revealing that the crises and misfortunes that the nation of the Prophet Muhammad faced throughout its ages were undoubtedly the result of keeping Ahlul-Bait out of the political life and of course the affairs of the state. And even the Prophet Muhammad famously said, one of his famous speech to his Ahlul-Bait, he said that I left to you two important things, that if you stick to them, you will never go astray. One of them is the Holy Quran, the Holy Scripture. And the second one is my progeny, my Ahlul-Bait, that if you stick to them, you will never go astray. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, on that famous speech and saying of the Prophet Muhammad, we have a small break and we will be back. Stay tuned. Welcome back, our dear viewers, to this exclusive episode on Imam Hussein TV 3. Before the break, we talked about the importance of Imam Ali alayhi salam to the success of the Islamic mission, and we have mentioned some of his prominent deeds that were glorified and embraced in the Holy Quran. It's really honorable to make every effort to demonstrate the virtues of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and it is really prideful to work as painstakingly as possible to line up the innumerable assets of this ideal man. The history of Imam Ali alayhi salam is strongly connected to the history of the Prophet Muhammad in particular and to the history of Islam in general. The painstaking struggle of the Prophet Muhammad and his cousin Imam Ali alayhi salam were the only source of light that illuminated the Arabian Peninsula. They carried with them all an inclusive liberty to human thought and a comprehensive reformation that embraces every aspect of life by encouraging separate of knowledge, eradication of ignorance, development of intellect, and raising man's level from the evils of this life to a life thriving with illumination. The purpose of our commemoration of this event and sharing sadness with you, our dear viewers, and with the awaited one from the progeny of the Prophet Muhammad, may Allah hasten his appearance, is to clarify to people the distinctive role of the pure family of the Prophet Muhammad. But nevertheless, the tyrannical authorities at that time gave no space to the pure family of the Prophet Muhammad to play their distinctive role and fundamental role into shaping and reforming the community at that time. They were oppressed, persecuted, and killed, and even their followers were dealt by with the same manner. The Prophet Muhammad, the Messenger of Allah, was poisoned and killed. His cousin Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam was killed by Ibn Muljim al-Muradi. The elder son of Imam Ali alayhi salam, namely Hussein Al-Hassan, was poisoned by Muawiyah. and the junior son of Imam Ali, namely Al-Hussein, was killed by Yazid ibn Muawiyah in Karbala. And even their mother, the dearest daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, was killed in her house. And ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, if you read the history of Islam impartially and away from emotions, you will be certain that there was a plot intendedly concluded against the Ahlul-Bait in order to keep them away from the political life and the affairs of the state. And those who did that gave no regard and paid no attention to what the Prophet had recommended them. It's also worth remembering here some of Imam Ali alayhi salam, Imam Ali's saying. Imam Ali alayhi salam famously said to one of his loyal companions named Malik al-Ashtar, he said to Malik, "Oh Malik, remember the people are of two kinds. The people are of two kinds. They are either brothers in religion or they are equals in humanity." And that famous saying of Imam Ali alayhi salam gives us the indication that regardless of your religious identity, regardless of your religious background, that we should deal with each other according to the standards of humanity. He also used to say, "By God, if I see on one side is the truth and on the other side all the rest of people, I, without caring and paying heed to those reproaching me, will fight all alone on the way and path of the right against them." And ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, if anyone wants to understand Ahlul-Bait, we should, and he should, take the Ahlul-Bait out of Shia context, out of Iraqi context, out of Islam context, because each one of the infallible Imams had a universal message. And the universality of their messages makes them unforgettable from the minds of the believers. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, when he was leading the down prayer in the Grand Mosque of Al-Kufa, he was killed by Ibn Muljam al-Muradi when he was one of Al-Khawarij who were fed up with hatred and aggression toward Islam. Of course, the martyrdom of Imam Ali alayhi salam was a great loss to Islam, because Imam Ali alayhi salam was the embodiment of everything Islam stands for. And therefore we are commemorating this event and commemorating the